And friends, our scripture lesson for today is taken from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 23, verses 1 through 12. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it. But do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love to have the place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have people call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant, and all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted." Well, Tuesday is finally election day, and I cannot wait for the elections to be over. It sure seems like they've been going on forever. Now, every time there's an election, and it doesn't matter what office it's for, one of the topics is the character of the candidates, because we want to know what kind of person they are, and we particularly want to know if they're the kind of person who will do what they say they're going to do. Because candidates running for office make promises, and we want to know who is going to live up to the promises that they make. Now, we don't like hypocritical politicians. We don't like people who say they're going to do one thing and then don't even try to do it once they're in office. And hypocrisy is the central theme of our passage today, because Jesus is criticizing the hypocrisy of the scribes and the Pharisees. The scribes and the Pharisees being these experts, these religious leaders, and he says that what they do is they use that power, they use their knowledge to make life harder for others. He says that they tie up heavy burdens that are hard to bear, and they lay them on the shoulders of others. They lay these religious obligations on people that are difficult for them, and then they are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. Now, this is the kind of behavior that seems to rankle Jesus more than anything else. See, when Jesus encountered sinners, Jesus was full of compassion and understanding. The time you see Jesus use his harshest language, it's with people whom he perceives are making life harder for others. The people who make life harder for others instead of trying to make life easier for others are the people whom Jesus condemns. And this is something that we're all guilty of at times, right? We're all guilty of not holding ourselves to the same kinds of standards we hold to others, that we lay a burden on others that we don't lay on ourselves. All right, and we need to always ask ourselves, are we holding ourselves to the same standards that we hold others to? Now, this is such a common problem that Jesus speaks of it pretty often. I mean, a lot of us remember the time when Jesus talks about why is it that you see a speck in someone else's eye, yet you don't notice the log that's in your own eye. All right? Jesus speaks of it and speaks of it often because this is a really common problem, that so often we're not able to hold ourselves to the kind of standard we hold others to. And so we become people who say one thing and then we demand that other people live up to it, but we fail to live up to it ourselves. And when you occasionally find the person who lives up to what they say, they get one of the best compliments that we can confer on someone. We say, that is a person who walks the talk. That's a person who walks the talk. And when we have a person who doesn't live up to what they say, we just say, they don't walk the talk. Now, when we look at someone and say they don't walk the talk, the implication there is that they no longer have the right to be listened to. Don't pay attention to him. Don't pay attention to her. He doesn't walk the talk. But is that actually what Jesus says we should do? Is that what Jesus says we should do when we encounter people who fail to walk the talk? Look at what Jesus actually says. In talking about the scribes and Pharisees, he still says, do whatever they teach you. Do whatever they teach you. He says, do not do as they do. Don't do what they do because they're not walking the talk. But do what they teach you. Do what they teach because even though they don't do it, there's still value in the talk. The talk wasn't invalidated by the fact that they didn't do it. The talk remained valid. The talk remained the instruction of Moses. That's what it means by when Jesus says they sit in Moses' seat, okay? The talk is still valid talk that we should be listening to. Just don't do what they do. And that's kind of an important lesson for us to remember that the talk is still valuable even when our walk falls short of it. In fact, I would argue that our talk needs to be ahead of our walk. Our talk needs to be out there a little bit ahead of our walk because our talk is supposed to be aspirational. Our talk has to be in front of us. If our talk is brought back to the level of our walk, we might find ourselves never challenging ourselves to move further. Sometimes that could lead to a situation where our talk is asking very little of us because our walk isn't going very far. But if we keep our talk ahead of us, what do we do with that gap? And I argue that what's really important is that we be people for whom the talk is leading the walk. We need to be people who keep our talk out in front, but then become people who are moving toward it. That needs to be the standard. And I'll tell you, that's certainly true for every preacher. There isn't a preacher in the world of whom we can say, I certainly can never say it, that we walk the talk. Why? Because our talk is Jesus. And if the talk is Jesus and we're not Jesus, our walk is never going to meet the talk. But what is important is that we strive most of the time, and I certainly fall short even on this standard, of trying to move toward the talk. My goal, my hope, is that my walk moves at least in the direction of the talk. And for everyone who's a Jesus follower, your talk still needs to be Jesus. And then your walk needs to be led by that talk. You need to be people who are moving toward the talk, and that's where your credibility lies. The problem isn't that your walk falls short of your talk. The problem is if your walk stops moving toward the talk. And how do we make sure that we're still moving toward the talk? There's a pretty simple formula that works in every profession, in every area of life that I've ever seen, and it's pointed to by what Jesus says. He says, don't call yourselves rabbi. You're not to be called rabbi, which means teacher. You're not to be called teacher. You're not to be referred to as the one who knows everything, because you have one teacher, and that teacher is Jesus. But instead, he says, remember that you are all students. See, if your talk leads your walk, then what you're doing is you're always learning. You're always learning so that your walk is moving toward the talk. And across absolutely every endeavor in life, the constant that you're going to find is that the best performers at anything are perpetual students. The people who are bad at something stopped learning. That's why they're bad. They never got better. And the best are never satisfied. The best are always perfecting. The best are always doing what they can to move themselves forward. You know, in the spring, all the professional sports leagues got shut down, and then in the fall, the NHL, NBA, they opened in bubbles where they isolated the teams. They had no contact with the outside world, or at least as little as possible, and they played all their games in empty stadiums. Well, a few weeks ago, LeBron James led the Los Angeles Lakers to their fourth NBA title. They weren't all with the Lakers, but he won his fourth title. It's a great achievement. He's a phenomenal player. And then a few days after he had won the championship, he posted a picture of himself on social media where he's watching TV, and the show he's watching is a documentary series called The Last Dance. Now, I don't know if any of you saw it, but if you are basketball fans, you definitely should watch this. It is a documentary series. It's available on Netflix, and it was about the final championship season of the Chicago Bulls Michael Jordan dynasty. If you're a sports fan, remember that Michael Jordan led the Bulls to 6 championships. And that final year before that team broke apart, that it was referred to as The Last Dance, and that's the title of the documentary. And so LeBron posted a picture of himself watching this documentary about Michael Jordan's 6th championship series, and he said, "Back at it. Back at it." See, he was learning. He said, back at it, always learning. Because he was looking at this. Because he's got 4 championships. And you know what I believe? Is that he's not just watching this documentary to see what about their motivation, how did they keep themselves motivated? How did they keep themselves striving when they had already won so many championships? I think he's watching that not because he just wants to get to 6. I think he's also watching the documentary to see what the forces were that split the team apart after the 6th championship. Because I don't think LeBron just wants 6. I think he wants 7. And so he's always learning. He's always learning. He's trying to get better. And in what might be the most controversial thing I'll ever say in a sermon, even as a Chicagoan who loved Michael Jordan's play, I might be willing to admit that LeBron James is the greatest of all time. Because he just keeps wanting to improve. And that's such an important lesson for you and for me. That we need to have aspirations. We need to not just walk the talk, but to have our talk be ahead of our walk. So that it's leading us. So that it's aspirational and inspiring us. And then we're continuing to learn how to move toward it. And every time our walk moves toward the talk keeps going. The talk keeps aiming us at something higher and something better, at something more noble, at becoming a better person than we had been before. Because we're never to be the person who thinks we've arrived. We're never supposed to be the person who thinks we've achieved. But rather, Jesus said, you're not to be called teacher. You have one teacher. You are all students. We're all still learning how to live our lives the way Jesus wants us to live them. And that talk is our guide. And what matters is not that we fall short, because we will. What matters is that we keep learning to move toward the talk. That the talk continues to be what leads us forward toward becoming the people Jesus wants us to be. Amen.